Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone. Welcome to OHRPP's Learn at Lunch. I look a little ghostly. Sorry about that. Today we're going to talk about what it means when you get IRB approval and what it doesn't mean as a corollary. And I'm going to talk about UCLA Policy 991, which was unavailable yesterday along with all the other campus policies, but they are back up, so you can follow the links when I send you the slides and understand sort of the depth of what I'm talking about. All right, so let's get started. So as I mentioned, UCLA Policy 991 is the policy that grants the Human Resource Protection Program at UCLA with the authority to be responsible for protecting the rights and welfare of human subjects in research. The policy talks about the scope and what is the research that is relevant to this policy. And so it's human subject research or clinical investigations, which is the FDA term for essentially the same thing. And that means it's a systematic investigation leading to generalizable knowledge, involving interaction or intervention with living human beings or use of identifiable private information. So that's the common rule definition of human subjects research. So that it could be that, or it could be involving the use of a test article in a living human being, and that's for FDA regulated research. So either of those two definitions, if what you're doing falls into that, then it will fall under Policy 991, assuming it's under our jurisdiction. So, under Policy 991, all UCLA faculty and staff conducting research within the scope of their duties at the university would need to submit that which qualifies for as human subjects research to OHRPP for review by the IRB. And other related offices. So, and it doesn't matter if there's funding or if there's no funding, that's irrelevant to this, the review, because the point of this policy is to describe how the university as a whole will manage protecting the rights and welfare of human subjects. And I'm going to go through the different components of the Human Research Protection Program at UCLA over the next few slides to give you sort of an understanding of how big the Human Research Protection Program is in scope and how many stakeholders there are, not just the IRB. All right, so first thing, we're going to talk about the Vice Chancellor for Research. Oh, I don't know why it's not automatic flipping. The Vice Chancellor for Research and Creative Activities is Roger Wakamoto, and he is what we call an institutional official. So he has been delegated by the Chancellor to represent UCLA in our federal-wide assurance. And in signing the federal-wide assurance, which is reconstituted every few years or so, he is agreeing that researchers at our institution are going to follow the regulations, or if it's federally funded and or federally regulated. And if it's not federally regulated, we have made a point to have commensurate protections. So protections that are equivalent to protect the rights and welfare of human subjects. So that is important. And he's also the person who is ensuring that we have adequate resources for research administration and all the support activities to assist investigators in conducting their research successfully. And then as part of his job, he can delegate or do things like sign reliance agreements. This is something that you would go through OHRPP to get signed, but he is the person who signs them, or he can delegate to another person at the institution. So he's one piece of the puzzle. His importance cannot be overstated in terms of ensuring resources for the Human Research Protection Program. The next piece of the Human Research Protection Program is I'm going to talk about UCOP. They have a Research Policy Analysis and Coordination Unit. And what they do is they provide regulatory and legal analysis and coordination between all the UC campuses. So for instance, if a new law comes out in California relating to privacy, we'll get from them a rundown of how that might intersect with human subjects research, what IRBs might need to do in addition to what they would do for privacy under the federal regulations, et cetera. So they're an important resource for all the campuses in that way. the next piece of the Human Research Protection Program. And so please stop me for any of these if you have questions about a particular office that I'm talking about. And I will say that this is not a complete list. This is 5 years of me learning how things work here. So there, I'm sure, are many offices I'm going to leave out. But the point of this is to give you an idea of like, it's a much bigger picture than the IRB. So the next thing I'll talk about is the UCLA Compliance Office, the UCLA Health Office of Compliance Services, and the UCOP Ethics Compliance and Audit Services. So all of these groups have an interest in human subjects research. You know, they have their corner of it, protecting privacy. The UCLA Campus Compliance Office manages the whistleblower hotline. So each of those handles issues that may come up and coordinates with OHRPP when applicable for research purposes. And this is the next one, is the big one that people get confused about, or are trying to figure out the answer to, or trying to understand all the possible ancillary committees. So again, as I said, this is my list that I have come across. There may be other offices. And so what these offices and committees are part of the Human Research Protection Program. They have a specialty niche focus. So they aren't applicable to all research, but if it is applicable, they will do the deep dive on their specific expertise. And what they do is the IRB does sort of an overview of the risk-benefit assessment, and they make sure they're following the regulations, but the IRB might not have the specific expertise that the ancillary committees do on that particular topic. So the ancillary committees supplement the IRB review with specific niche content, and things like the Institutional Biosafety Committee. So for instance, if you're using a viral vector to do, you know, gene modification or whatever you're doing, they would look and see, is the virus likely to escape? What's the risk to people around the human subject? All that kind of stuff that would be important to know, but is, again, niche information. Then we've got the ISPRC for cancer studies and the SRC, and they do, for certain subset of studies, they do a scientific review when there hasn't already been a scientific review. The IRB does its own scientific review, but this is a focused particular scientific review for those studies that haven't gone through the sort of rigor of an NIH section review. Then we've got a couple of radiation safety. We've got the MRSC and the RDRC, which are two committees that look at radiation. Medical Radiation Safety Committee looks at radiation use and in a protocol, and they'll do things like give us content to put in the consent form. They want to make sure that people understand the radiation risks, and they are specialists in that, so they help to explain the radiation risk in a research study. And then the Radioactive Drug Research Committee, it does similar work, but for radioactive drugs. And if there is a radioactive drug being used in your research, then you would need to get approval from that committee, as well as the IRB. So this brings up the question of, so is there an overarching one place to go to say, yes, you can do your research? And the IRB gives a very specific review, and these different offices also give really specific reviews. So the answer is no, there isn't like a single entity you can go to, a one-stop shop. You need to understand sort of the scope of the research that you're doing and look into all the different ancillary committees that you might need to go to in addition to the IRB if it's human subjects research. So let's see. There's also a controlled substance for research program, and that is to ensure that DEA Schedule 1 and 2 drugs are safely stored. You know, if someone has a drug problem and they got into the store and then they replaced it with like powdered sugar or whatever the thing is, a subject might not get the drug they need at the point in time of the protocol. So it is a safety issue to make sure that it is controlled in a controlled way. And they help investigators when there are specific DEA requirements. If there, for instance, the DEA on a research study requires a safe be used to store materials, then they would coordinate with the researcher to make sure that that is successfully accomplished. And then we have, let's see, CERC. CERC is a committee that helps us understand what to do when there is an investigator or researcher conflict of interest. And there's a certain threshold, there's an application process. And for all of these committees, as soon as you realize one of them is relevant to your research, it's important to reach out to them. I have links for all of them, all the ones that I found, and reach out to them and see what their application process is. Ask them, you know, at what point in the process do you go to them. For CERC, I know you go to them as soon as you think that you have a conflict. And then you discuss the conflict with them, you give them the disclosure, and then they either say, we don't think it's a conflict, or we do think it's a conflict, and it can be managed, and that sort of thing. So, and again, that's really, some of these have to happen before IRB approval. So for instance, CERC needs to look at the conflict of interest because there's downstream consequences of their review, which include disclosure in the consent form. Same thing for MRSC and radioactive drug research and IBC. So all of that is, you know, really talk to the specific office relevant to your research and find out how the process best works. Can someone unmute themselves to ask a question? Yeah, okay. All right, there's the Cannabis Advisory Board. So that's for people doing cannabis research. There's the Human Pluripotent Stem Cell Research Oversight Committee, if you're using that in your research. And lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about, there's the UCLA Health Investigational Pharmacy. That's another relevant office. You would need to set up drug dispensing for a drug trial through them. And I'm not sure what their process is, but with a link, you can get an email to reach out to them and find out about their process. So all of these people have a part to play in protecting the rights and welfare of human subjects. And one last one that I want to talk about is UCLA Legal Affairs. So what they do is provide support and help us understand, you know, different regulations, just like the UCOP office does. But one thing that they ask that we ensure that we do is include the Moore Clause, not related to me. But many years ago, there was a lawsuit against the Regents of the University of California about the use of research specimens for commercial purposes. And so you may notice in our template consent form, there is a clause we ask you to put in whenever relevant to your research project that discusses that includes the Moore Clause. So people understand that there is no plan to provide them with payment for any specimens that might lead to a commercial discovery. So that's sort of from the legal aspect of it. And it's important that people understand what they're getting into. So that's protecting the rights of subjects, is to help them understand what they can and can't expect from the research. There are other ancillary offices that are also gatekeepers to data. So if you are doing, for instance, research on students at UCLA and you need registrar data, you would have to go through the registrar. And even if the IRB approves a protocol, if the registrar is unwilling to release the data, that's the end of it. You know, we have no control. The IRB has no control over the data gatekeepers and their processes. So you would need to sort of reach out to them earlier in your process to make sure that what you want to do is even possible. You've also got the UCLA Health Data Governance and the UCLA CTSI Bioinformatics Group, both of which work to release UCLA patient data for research. And I believe both of them require, for human subjects research, an IRB approval. Then they go in and they pull the data that you need, but they do look at what do you need to answer your question and all that kind of good stuff. And you can find out more about their process following these links. And then, for instance, if you're going to do research on UCLA employees, campus employees or UCLA health employees, you would have to go to the HR, who is the owner of the private data in that realm. So again, it's really a question of what data do you need, and who controls that data, and are they willing to release that data for your purposes for research? So again, nothing that the IRB controls, so you would need to make sure that that's possible. So now I'll talk about the OHRPP, which is us. Yay, OHRPP. So we are a part of the Human Research Protection Program. And there are a number of components to our office. So I would say the first one is the IRBs. The most clear and obvious one. We have 5 IRBs at UCLA. And I put a link to a page that describes what kind of research each IRB reviews. We do it by specialty here at UCLA. Each committee meets twice a month. And there's a schedule on our website of meeting dates and deadlines for submitting to studies that need full board review. The schedule for that. Anything expedited or exempt gets reviewed on a rolling basis. So you wouldn't have to follow a calendar. And then with that group, with the IRBs, we have the IRB review unit staff in OHRPP. These are the people that you reach out to that support each of the 5 committees, and they're the ones who do the pre-reviews, that review your responses to the IRB, that issue correspondence from the IRB. They're your go-between for the IRB and the research teams, and they are your best contact for a study that you've already submitted. So look and see who on the unit is associated with your study and ask them questions. They'll help you get through if you don't understand contingencies sent by the committee. They're really helpful. So that's what they do. And then it could be an outside IRB is part of our process. Because of reliance, we might have WCG or Advara for commercial IRB, or IRBs at other academic institutions or hospitals, and they become sort of folded in to our part of the HRPP through reliance agreements that are, again, facilitated by our reliance team, but signed by Dr. Wakamoto and his designees. So, so that's one piece of our group. And then we've got the Quality Improvement Unit, which I'm a part of. And what we do is provide educational presentations to research community, IRB members, and OHRPP staff. We conduct internal OHRPP and IRB audits to ensure compliance with our policies and the regulations. We conduct routine and for-cause post-approval monitoring of research, and to ensure compliance with IRB determinations. All right, so does anyone have any pressing questions about OHRPP? Things you didn't know, things you are curious about? Anything else? No? Okay. We're an open book. All right, so moving on from OHRPP, there's another piece of the Human Research Protection Program, and that is slides that keep going. Investigators. Investigators need to qualify to be an investigator under Policy 900. They either need to qualify as an investigator under the policy, or they can obtain an exception letter, or they need to have a faculty sponsor. And what their responsibility, they have a lot of responsibilities in protecting the rights and welfare of human subjects. Investigators need to obtain prospective approval from the IRB for human subjects research. That means don't start it before you come to us. And then the investigators are also responsible for the conduct of all of their study personnel. So they need to have good communication within their team. They need to follow determinations and stipulations of the IRB. They need to report events in a timely fashion that meet the threshold described in our PAW guidance. They need to ensure adequate resources are available to conduct the research, ensuring that all research personnel are qualified for their roles. Did anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay.
I had a question more, sorry.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I noticed that there's a difference in the Bruin IRB template, and I couldn't identify where Policy 900 status is indicated in the Bruin IRB application.
You are very astute. We are actually not collecting Policy 900 information. The study team needs to retain that. So if the person doesn't qualify under Policy 900, if they get an exception letter, they need to just hold on to it in the study records. If they are a trainee, then they would need to put someone on their team that was assigned the role of faculty sponsor. But that's a great question. Thank you. We're putting that responsibility back on the investigator to ensure they have it, and that can be audited to make sure that you have the right exception letters. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So the other thing that investigators are responsible for is to not implement any changes to the research without IRB approval, except in the case of emergencies to safeguard the rights and welfare of subjects. And there is no time to reach out to the IRB. So it's truly in very urgent circumstances would that be it. And then you would need to tell the IRB after the fact that happened. The investigator is responsible for responding in a timely manner to OHRPP QIU's notice of selection for routine monitoring. As I mentioned in the last slide, we are responsible and given the authority under Policy 991 to do monitoring of ongoing human subjects research, and we do it to support the researchers, to give them the tools they need to weather external audits. So we really want to help you be the best you can be and protect the rights and welfare of human subjects. So, so please respond quickly, and if you need to postpone it, we can be flexible. And the last thing that is really important that I wanted to convey is that the investigators are responsible for identifying and complying with all institutional and sponsor requirements, and that's beyond the IRB requirements for the conduct of human subjects research. So that would mean if the sponsor requires you have extra training in GCP or something, that you take that. Like, it's not something the IRB is going to check up on, but the sponsor will. If the PI is responsible for figuring out what ancillary committees are relevant to their research and reaching out to them and applying to them to get their sign off on the research as well. Another thing that's really important is accessing data from the medical record through one of the two pathways that I described. So the governance group or the CTSI bioinformatics group. If you're getting identifiable data from the medical record, it's really critical that you do it in a way where the institution can keep an audit trail for HIPAA purposes of the use of PHI. So, we're not encouraging people to go into the medical records and pull data manually for research purposes, because then there's no audit trail to be used. So please use the right data retrieval system to make that happen. And then we've got faculty sponsors who are basically responsible, just as PIs are. They're responsible for oversight of their student trainee investigators to ensure their compliance with UCLA policy. So things like all the things the investigator is responsible for, the faculty sponsor needs to ensure that the student investigator is also up to snuff on those things. And department chairs. We don't talk about department chairs a great deal when we talk about Policy 991, but I wanted to bring it up. It's written in the policy that they are responsible for reviewing human subjects research activities in their department or division, and they need to ensure that the proper approvals have been obtained, and appropriate resources are available to conduct the research. So that's critical. Just like the institutional official is responsible for making sure that there's a research administration infrastructure to support the research and ethical review of the research, department chairs need to make sure that there is sufficient personnel to conduct the research and whatever space and other resources are needed to conduct the research. And sometimes they're delegated by the dean to write exception letters, so they need to know who's doing the research in their department. Sneaking forward. All right, and then let's see, we've got more people in our human subjects protection program. The next group is, I'm going to talk about the Human Research Policy Board, and they're responsible for creating UCLA-specific policies related to human subjects research here at UCLA. You've got UCLA Health Administration. They provide governance of activities, UC Health, of all the 6 academic centers in the UC system. UCLA Health, again, their administration provides governance of activities at UCLA Health locations. Study sponsors, so this is in the FDA sense of sponsors, are responsible for complying with submission and reporting requirements of the FDA. If UCLA it has a sponsor investigator, one and the same, it's not from a drug company, then they have support through the UCLA Office of FDA Regulatory Affairs to help them with their submissions and to ensure that they can submit to the FDA all of the reports that are needed. There are additional responsibilities if you are a sponsor. And then lastly, which is something you might not expect, another piece of the Human Research Protection Program at UCLA are the participants. We think that they're responsible for asking questions and finding out what's going to happen in the research. Of course, the bulk of the responsibility is on the research team and the investigator to make sure that things are explained to them clearly. But they also may voice concerns about the research and the conduct of the research, which the investigator is sort of duty bound to look at and try to address, if at all possible, complaints to them. And then the other thing is they're responsible for declining to participate when the participation does. Sorry, I muted myself. So when the research participant looks at the consent conference, they talk it out with the investigator, they ask the good questions, and it's really like their responsibility to say, oh wait, I don't want to get that that procedure. So this isn't the study for me. So it's really important that they be a partner in this process. And so with that in mind, we have, what does an IRB approval mean? So what an IRB approval means is that either UCLA or an external IRB, if it's under single IRB, has determined that the research complies with the basic principles of the Belmont Report, respect, justice, and beneficence, along with either the common rule regulations, commensurate protections, sort of equivalent to the common rule regulations, and we have a guidance on what those commensurate protections are, or FDA regulations governing the use of test articles in humans. In addition to that, it means that the IRB approval has said that local, state, and/or institutional policies where the research will be conducted have been reviewed and complied with. So what that means is that there's a lot outside of the IRB scope. All the ancillary committees, the administration at different locations have the right to say, we don't want to conduct the research. UC Legal could look at the liability of doing a research project and recommend that the institution say no. So no other office at UCLA can override an IRB disapproval, but there are many that can override an IRB approval to halt the research. So does that make sense? Is that clear to everyone? Is that there's a lot of players with a lot of different perspectives that that may have additional requirements beyond the IRB. Anyone else? Okay, so that was my presentation. I just wanted to sort of give you an overview of this giant institution we work at, and what it means to sort of navigate through the system and all the different pieces of protecting human subjects, and where those offices and committees might be, and get you started on a process of your own exploration relevant to the kind of research you do of what offices may be necessary to interact with in addition to OHRPP for your human subjects research. I'm happy to answer any questions. If anyone else from OHRPP has additional things they'd like to add to this content, I'm happy to have you chime in. And if not, we will stop.